This week, Square Enix did something a little bit interesting, and they have put out a survey, a questionnaire, asking fans for feedback on the Final Fantasy series. So I went ahead and did this survey, went through all the questions, and I wanted to talk about it in this video, talk about some of the questions on the survey, some of the feedback they're looking for, and then just get into some of my general thoughts on the Final Fantasy series and the direction it's gone in over the last couple years. So let's jump right into it, and let's just cover the basics of the survey. So it was released this week. It's open until January 9th. So if you're interested in giving your feedback, you still have a couple weeks to do that, and I'll try to leave a link below to the survey in the video description. But let's jump into, some of the questions in the survey. And the survey itself has 33 questions. Interesting number of questions to add, but it starts off pretty basic. So just general questions, how many consoles do you own? Select them from this list. How many games have you bought this year? So first few questions are very general, I guess, trying to get a background, what consoles you play, what type of games, how many games are you purchasing, all that type of thing. And then it moves in a bit into the Final Fantasy social media presence. So they ask, what kind of posts do you want to see on the Square Enix or the Final Fantasy Twitter channels? Do you want to hear, new announcements, collaborations, new merchandise releases, all that type of thing. So they gather some feedback in that area. And then it moves into some of the more interesting questions. So they ask, for example, select the Final Fantasy games you've played, and there'll be a huge list of all the mainline Final Fantasies. So you can select those. And after you do that, they ask, of your top 3, let's say, Final Fantasy games, rank them in the order that you like them. So it's interesting to see they're actually looking to get some feedback on, which games in the mainline series did you like, did you enjoy, and which were your favorites. So I haven't played them all. The ones that I've played are Final Fantasy 2 and 3, the North American versions, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy 9, 10, and then jumped all the way to 16. So those are the mainline Final Fantasies that I've played through, but those are the ones I selected. I selected my favorites. And then they go into some more kind of general Final Fantasy questions. So they ask, in what other ways did you enjoy Final Fantasy? For example, through music, through art books, merchandise, apparel, that kind of stuff. So some more general Final Fantasy questions. They ask, do you enjoy Final Fantasy by yourself, or do you, talk about it with friends, talk about it with family? Do you play alone? Do you play with other people? So all those types of questions. And then they even go into some questions around mobile. Have you played any of the mobile Final Fantasy games? Have you heard of these mobile Final Fantasy games? Did you hear about the Final Fantasy collaboration with Magic the Gathering? So really trying to get a feel, I guess, of how in tune Final Fantasy fans are with everything that's going on in the Final Fantasy series, not just in gaming, not just in the actual, PlayStation and Switch games, but outside of gaming as well, right? In Magic the Gathering cards, in apparel, in mobile games, in a lot of different areas. So pretty interesting survey. And then the survey ends with a couple of the most interesting questions, I think. So one of them was, how high is your expectations for the future of Final Fantasy? And they give you a scale of 1 to 10, and you can select, how excited basically are you? How high is your expectations for the future of the series? And then they ask the general question, how do you feel about the Final Fantasy series? Do you love it? Do you like it? I don't know, not a big fan, etc. So they end off with those questions. And overall, I thought some of the questions were interesting. Some were kind of very basic, like, of course, they got to ask you, what gender do you identify as? What region do you live, etc. So there's some random ones in there like that. But generally, it was kind of interesting to get a feel of the type of feedback they're looking for from their customers, from fans of the series. And it's always good when when companies like Square Enix gather this feedback, because, it gives us a chance as fans of the series, as players of the games, to hopefully, get a little influence there, let them know what we enjoy, what we don't enjoy, kind of steer them in the right direction, because ultimately they should be a customer focused company and they should be making games for the fans, what the fans want. So I was hoping they were gonna get into a little bit more detail into some of the more nitty gritty questions like, do you like the action combat? Do you want to see a return to the turn-based combat? But that's just maybe me being a little selfish with what I want to see from the Final Fantasy series in the future. So that's the basics of the survey. Again, if you want to do that, you can go ahead and do that. It's open still for a couple weeks, but I want to pivot now and talk about, my general feelings of the Final Fantasy series, the direction it's gone, and I guess what I hope for it in the future. And again, I mentioned the games I played in the series, and I've been playing it for a long time, maybe not as long as some of you watching for sure, but I've been around since the Super Nintendo era. And to me, I think like a lot of people, in some ways, the Final Fantasy series has kind of gone downhill, to be honest. I think after the change to the more action combat, some things change for the better, a lot of things change for the worse, and I haven't been a huge fan of the Final Fantasies after 10. But with that said, I haven't beaten them all. So I beat 10 and then I beat 16, tried a couple of the Final Fantasies in between, but so I can't, say too much about them because I don't want to be unfair as I didn't play all the way through. But for me, the action combat's never really stuck. I've never really enjoyed it as much as the turn-based combat. When I first played through 16, I really enjoyed the beginning of the game, and then somewhere towards the middle to the end, I stopped enjoying it as much. I felt like it didn't feel like a fully complete game to me. Like the shops weren't that great, the weapon upgrades weren't that great, the combat started feeling repetitive, but the graphics, the world, the characters, like in those areas, the game really excelled. Really enjoyed Clive and Cid in Final Fantasy 16. Really enjoyed the look of the world. But some areas I really felt it was lacking, and towards the end of the game, middle of the game, the combat for me really got repetitive. But over time, as I've thought about the game, moved past my playthrough, it is growing on me. Like, I do look back at it more fondly. There was a lot to love about Final Fantasy 16, so I'm glad I played all the way through that one, because it did really have an effect on me. I really enjoyed it, and the music was really good as well. So there was some areas that I think it was lacking, but looking back on it, I'm really starting to feel maybe a bit nostalgic for it and a bit more appreciative for what it was. So Final Fantasy 16 was cool, but I can't help but imagine if the game would have been better turn-based. And for me, I do really want to see a return to the turn-based Final Fantasies. I would love to see that. And I think they're going to do it eventually. Or at least what they can do, why not have the series go in a couple different directions, right? You can still have some action combat Final Fantasy games, but also have some turn-based Final Fantasy games, right? I don't think you really need to choose one or the other. In my opinion, mainline should stick turn-based, and they can have some action combat spin-offs, but that's just my opinion. But overall, I do think there's still a really bright future for the Final Fantasy series. I wouldn't say it's fallen off. I think that a lot of people really enjoyed the Final Fantasy remake, and there's definitely a lot of potential. So I'm really curious to see where they go with 17. I know, even though I mentioned some of the problems of 16, I think 16 is going to be hard to beat. It's going to be hard to top off because they did a lot right with it. I love that they went back into that, medieval age. The story was really great, and it did have a lot of potential. I think if they polished up the combat a bit more, added in a bit more variety in the weapons and items, that game could have really been great. But still a good game, so we'll see what they can do. But I'm really curious, what are your thoughts on the Final Fantasy series? Do you like the direction it's gone? Have you played the latest mainline entry, Final Fantasy 16? What did you think about it? Recently, I picked this up right here. I got the Final Fantasy 16 poster collection and haven't even opened it up yet, but just picked this up off Amazon because it was like 60% off. And I really do enjoy some of the art in the game, so you can see some of the posters included here. But I do You know, where I think 16 really shined again was the story, was the art, was the music. The combat was good, it just got a little bit old for me, but there was a lot to love about that, and some of the quotes in the game also very memorable. So again, Sid, awesome character, one of the best Sids in any Final Fantasy. But drop a comment, let me know. Let me know what you think about the survey, if you took it, are you planning to take it, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe for more, and that's it. Have a good day.